The stars had once been our domain, our eternal playground. As the ruling race of the galaxy, the ancients were revered for our unmatched intellect, our mastery over technology, and our ability to bend the very fabric of space-time to our will. We, the elders of the Great Federation, had conquered countless worlds, sowing the seeds of our culture and civilization among the stars. But then came them. At first, the humans were nothing more than an amusing curiosity. A primitive species, dwelling on a backwater planet called Earth. They had no mastery over the stars, no understanding of the true vastness of the universe. They were struggling with their own petty wars, their primitive technologies, and their fragile existence. We observed them from afar, our advanced sensors tracking their every move. They were not even worthy of our attention, not in the beginning. Then came the signal. It was a simple message, one that a child could have deciphered. "We are ready." We laughed, assuming it was a fluke or some sort of desperate plea for help. But then, we realized something. They weren't asking for help. They were declaring their readiness to take their place among the stars. At first, we assumed it was a fluke. Perhaps some newly developed technology had accidentally made its way into their hands. So, we waited. But the message came again. And again. And again. This time, we didn't laugh. This time, we listened. We had made a grave mistake. In our arrogance, we had underestimated the humans. Their technology was crude, their weapons primitive, and their tactics laughable. But there was one thing they possessed that we, the mighty ancients, had long lost: resilience. Where we had grown complacent in our power, they had grown in their determination. While we had spent millennia refining our perfect systems and formulas, they had spent their short lifespan discovering new ways to break the rules. When they launched their first wave at our defenses, we were confident in our shields and our energy fields. But their weapons were different. They didn't obey the laws of physics as we knew them. They bent and broke the very structures we had carefully constructed. We responded with force, unleashing the full might of our fleet. But each time, we underestimated them. Their ships were fragile, yes, but they could move faster, think quicker, and adapt better than we ever could. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, and they had mastered it. But the real shock came when they initiated their final assault on the Federation capital. We thought we had prepared every defense, every countermeasure. But the humans, they didn't fight with ships or weapons. They fought with something far more dangerous. They fought with hope. For the first time in millennia, we felt something we had never known: fear. Their belief in themselves, in each other, was their weapon. Their unity, their persistence, wore down our will. The walls of our great city began to crack. The shields began to falter. And in that moment, we realized that the humans were not just another species. They were the future. We tried to resist, to continue the fight. But with every passing moment, it became clearer. The tide was turning. The humans had won. The day we surrendered was not a day of defeat, it was a day of rebirth. We recognized that we had failed to see what was truly important. Power, intellect, technology, these were all fleeting. What truly made a species worthy of survival was the strength of their spirit. And the humans had that in abundance. We signed the peace treaty in the ruins of what had once been the Federation's grandest city. The humans, standing proud and resolute, had beaten us not with weapons or tactics, but with their unbreakable will. That day, we learned an important truth. The greatest weapon in the universe is the unyielding determination of a species that refuses to be defeated. And so, we bowed before them, acknowledging their victory, and from that moment on, the galaxy was no longer ours to control. It was theirs. And we would serve them, as they had once served us. The days that followed our surrender were both humbling and enlightening. As the galaxy's former rulers, we had always lived with a sense of superiority. The humans, on the other hand, carried no such arrogance. They welcomed us into their fold, but with a quiet strength that spoke volumes. The treaty we had signed was not one of submission alone. It was a bond of cooperation. The humans made it clear they did not seek to dominate, but rather to elevate. We, the once great ancients, would now share our knowledge with them, but they would also teach us something far more profound. Their society had flourished not because they were the most technologically advanced, but because they valued the essence of life itself. Family, connection, Emotion. These things that we, in our millennia of existence, had long discarded in favor of logic and calculation, were the very foundation upon which humans built their future. The humans did not simply look to conquer new worlds. They looked to understand them, to respect them, to live in harmony with them. And it was this approach, this reverence for life in all its forms, that had brought them to the forefront of the galaxy. For the first time in our existence, we felt small. Not in terms of our intellect or our power, but in terms of our perspective. We had been so obsessed with perfection, with control, that we had lost sight of the very things that made life meaningful. And the humans, they had never forgotten. One by one, we began to learn from them. The young ones among us, those who had never known war, flocked to human academies, eager to embrace their ways. They studied not just science and technology, but art, philosophy, and emotion. The old ways of the Federation, rigid and inflexible, began to crumble in the face of human warmth and compassion. It was not an easy transition. For many of us, it felt like we were giving up a part of ourselves. The fear of losing our identity, of becoming something lesser, gnawed at our minds. But the humans showed us something remarkable. True strength is not in what we hold on to, but in what we are willing to let go of. And so, we adapted. Slowly but surely, we became something new, something better. We embraced the human ideals of unity, not just among our own people, but with the countless other species that inhabited the galaxy. We built alliances based on mutual respect and shared goals, not on power or domination. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all came when we realized that the humans, in their infinite wisdom, had not simply been preparing to conquer the galaxy, they had been preparing to heal it. For too long, the galaxy had been a fractured place, torn apart by war, greed, and the pursuit of power. The humans, with their resilience and their hope, had offered a vision of a unified future. They had given us the gift of a second chance. And in that moment, we understood the true meaning of the day we surrendered. It was not a day of defeat. It was a day of transformation. We had surrendered not just our weapons, our cities, or our fleets. We had surrendered our old ways of thinking, our old fears. And in their place, we had embraced something far more powerful. The belief that no matter how small or insignificant we may seem, together, we could build something far greater than the sum of our parts. As we stood side by side with the humans, gazing out at the stars we had once claimed as our own, we knew that the galaxy was in good hands. The future belonged not to the ancients, nor to the humans, but to all of us. And together, we would ensure that it was a future worth fighting for. Years passed, and the galaxy began to look different. Once, it had been a place of tension, suspicion, and endless wars fought for supremacy. Now, it was becoming a mosaic of cultures, each contributing their unique strengths to the collective whole. The old borders that once divided us, territories claimed in the name of power, had dissolved. In their place, a new kind of unity blossomed, not born of domination, but of understanding. The humans had shown us what it meant to rebuild, to focus not on what we had lost, but on what we could create together. They had taught us how to find strength not only in victory but in the struggles that preceded it. To them, every defeat was a lesson, every failure a stepping stone. It was a mentality we had forgotten in our long reign, where power was always seen as a sign of success, and weakness a mark of failure. The transformation of the ancients was gradual but profound. We had once been a race that sought to control every aspect of the universe, from the smallest particles to the grandest of stars. Now, we saw the value of nurturing, of supporting life in its many forms. We began to build not just for ourselves, but for others, the weaker species that had long been overlooked, the struggling civilizations that had never been given a chance to thrive. We extended our hand to them, guided by the principles we had learned from the humans. It was not always easy. Old habits died hard. There were those among us who resisted this new way of thinking, those who yearned for the days when we stood alone at the top of the galactic hierarchy. They saw the humans as a threat, a challenge to everything we had once known. But we had learned that true power was not about asserting control. It was about shared responsibility. And little by little, even the most reluctant of our people began to see the truth in it. The humans, with their characteristic optimism, never judged us for our past. They did not see us as enemies to be vanquished, but as allies who had simply lost their way. They helped us heal, not by telling us what to do, but by showing us how to move forward with integrity and compassion. They had not come to conquer us, they had come to help us rediscover ourselves. As the years turned into decades, our alliance with the humans deepened. They introduced us to new technologies, but more importantly, to new ideas. Our understanding of the universe expanded, not just through scientific discovery, but through cultural exchange. The arts, music, and philosophies of Earth began to permeate our world. And in return, we shared our knowledge of the cosmos, of the ancient technologies that had once made us the rulers of the stars. But the greatest gift the humans gave us was the concept of empathy. They showed us that no matter how advanced we became, the most important thing was to understand and care for each other. It was a lesson that transcended species, one that bound us all together in ways we could never have imagined before. There came a time when the children of both our species, ancient and human, began to look up at the stars with the same sense of wonder. They no longer saw them as a vast, uncaring void to be dominated, but as a realm to explore and protect. The legacy of our cooperation was no longer a story of conquest, but of stewardship. The galaxy, once a fractured place, now hummed with the energy of collective purpose. There were still challenges to face, still problems to solve, but the difference was that we no longer faced them alone. We faced them together, united by the belief that we could build something greater than ourselves. The ancients had surrendered to the humans, but in doing so, we had not lost our place in the stars. Instead, we had found a new purpose, one that was built not on power, but on collaboration, understanding, and hope. It was a future neither of us could have predicted, but one we were now committed to shaping. And as we gazed at the endless expanse of space, we realized that this was only the beginning. The future unfolded before us in ways we had never anticipated. In the decades since our surrender, the once mighty ancients had not just been reintegrated into the galactic fold, we had become a cornerstone of the new age of peace and discovery. The very fabric of our existence had been altered, transformed by the gentle yet powerful influence of the humans. The galaxy, vast and teeming with life, was no longer a battlefield. It was a living network of shared knowledge and mutual respect. The old ways of competition and supremacy gave way to cooperation and collaboration. The ruins of our once great empire were now the foundations for something far greater, something that could only exist through the unity of many, not the dominance of one. One of the most striking changes was the formation of the Galactic Assembly, a council made up of representatives from every intelligent species across the stars. No longer was there a singular power that dictated the fates of the weaker civilizations. Now, every voice, regardless of how small, had a say in the decisions that shaped the future. The ancients, once the unquestioned rulers, now sat alongside the humans and other species as equals, all working together to ensure the stability and prosperity of the galaxy. There were still those who feared change. Old factions, remnants of the past, whispered about rebellion, about reclaiming the old order. But they were few and far between. The majority had embraced the new world we had built, one where survival was no longer about subjugation, but about understanding. The humans had shown us that true strength lay not in domination, but in diversity, in the willingness to learn from one another. And we had learned much. The humans were, in many ways, an enigma. Their society had risen from the ashes of countless wars, their history scarred by division and conflict. Yet, it was this very history that had shaped them into the resilient, compassionate beings they were. They had been forged in adversity, and it was this strength that had allowed them to overcome the greatest challenges, including the one that had brought us all to the brink of destruction. But what truly set them apart was their unwavering belief in the potential of every individual. They did not see each other as mere tools to be used in the pursuit of power. They saw each other as equals, as partners in a shared journey. This belief in the inherent worth of all beings, no matter their origins, their abilities, or their station in life, was something that resonated deeply with us. The children of both our species grew up together, learning from each other, sharing stories and dreams, building relationships that transcended the old divisions. Where once we had seen them as insignificant, we now saw them as equals in every sense of the word. And they, in turn, saw us not as ancient, distant rulers, but as mentors, as fellow travelers on the same journey. The humans had shown us that there was no limit to what could be achieved when we worked together, when we put aside our egos and embraced our shared humanity, or in our case, shared sentience. The vastness of space was no longer a challenge to be conquered. It was a frontier to be explored, a place of endless possibilities, where every discovery was an opportunity for growth. As we traveled the stars together, we witnessed the wonders of the universe in a way we never had before. Planets once thought barren revealed hidden life, alien cultures once considered too primitive were now thriving, and ancient ruins, long forgotten, began to speak their secrets to us. Perhaps the greatest gift we received from the humans was the simple understanding that the journey never ends. No matter how much we achieve, how far we reach, there is always more to learn, more to discover, more to share. The universe is vast, but it is also a place where every being, no matter how small, has a role to play. In time, the day we surrendered became a distant memory, a story passed down through generations not as a tale of defeat, but as one of rebirth. A day when we, the ancients, had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true greatness is not in power, but in humility, not in conquest, but in connection. And so, we moved forward, side by side with the humans and all the species of the galaxy, not as rulers, but as stewards of a shared future. Together, we would continue to explore the stars, not as conquerors, but as caretakers, learning from the past and building a new tomorrow, one where the flame of hope, sparked by the humans' indomitable spirit, would never burn out. As the stars stretched infinitely before us, we stood at the threshold of an age that none of us could have imagined when we first met. The universe, once an endless sea of untapped power, now glimmered with the promise of endless possibilities. Together, the humans and the ancients had transformed the very fabric of the galaxy, stitching together worlds that had once been divided by fear, greed, and suspicion. But the most remarkable change was not the worlds we had touched, nor the technologies we had exchanged. It was the bond we had formed. The day we surrendered had not been the end of our journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where our greatest victories were not measured in battles won or stars claimed, but in the lives we had touched, the lessons we had learned, and the unity we had achieved. The humans had never sought to conquer us. They had sought to remind us of something we had long forgotten, that true strength lies not in the dominance of others, but in the power to lift them up. They had come to us not with weapons, but with wisdom. And in the end, they had shown us the greatest truth of all, that even the mightiest of civilizations could learn from the humblest of hearts. Now, standing together, we gazed out at the stars, not as conquerors, but as equals. The galaxy, once fragmented by war, was now united by the bonds of understanding, compassion, and shared dreams. And as we looked out at the endless expanse before us, we knew one thing for certain: the journey had only just begun. With every passing day, the legacy of our surrender became clearer. It was not a symbol of defeat, but of transcendence. We, the ancients, had learned that the universe was not a place to be ruled, it was a place to be nurtured, protected, and cherished. And the humans, with their boundless optimism, had reminded us that even in the face of the unknown, there was always hope. And so, we stood at the dawn of a new era, ready to explore the stars not with ambition, but with reverence, not with power, but with humility, not with conquest, but with compassion. Together, we would forge a future where every world, every being, and every dream had a place in the great tapestry of the cosmos. For in the end, we had not surrendered to the humans. We had surrendered to something far greater, the belief that, together, we could create a future that was worth living for. And that, truly, was the most extraordinary victory of all.